previous one and quickly update it.
Which usually introduce kind of, often I forget something, so maybe you should double check me after. That's the weird part, which is the last version or lesson or how less it is. You know, last time
that's good.
I installed PowerPoint, the last version some time ago. It kind of changed all the configuration so that every LibreOffice or OpenOffice files and not, by default you click on it and it opens the PowerPoint. It wants to convert it every time.
Let's see what this USB works. Yeah, I know.
Oh, that's 15.
All right. Let's see what happens if I just plug that in. This is not a USB stick. And why would I do that? Nothing. Some sort of nice keyboard.
So do we have Brian here, or is
Brian is remote. I've sorted out his booking for Meet Echo, so that's all fine. And he's already on Meet Echo. So.
Cool.
Yeah, this USB thing just doesn't work for me.
Okay, here it is. Hopefully with no.
It's a Logitech USB receiver. Oh, perhaps that comes in as a separate keyboard. I have no idea how to change keyboards. That does nothing.
It's getting there. And
I don't want to do it in Chrome.
Good afternoon. This is the DTN Working Group meeting.
Let's see. Is that even doing what? What is that doing? It's a silly idea. Mirror most screens.
So let's start while my friend Rick is taking care of the screen thing. So again, this is the DTN Working Group. Slides are on the data tracker. So this meeting is under Note Well, so everything you say or you write is under the Note Well. Please see the various documents related to this. Cool. Proposed agenda. Almost done the first point. Second is Scott for BPBIS, then Ed for BPSec. Brian remotely for TCP/CL v4, and then Ed again for the Asynchronous Management Architecture and Protocol, and then last on a heterogeneous addressing. John is presenting, right?
John is presenting.
So again, the main objective or the first priority of the working group is getting the BPBIS stable and then, pushing forward. So everything depends on it would be, in good shape for progressing the rest. Ed, you would do as usual your great notes. Thank you very much. However, Ed is presenting, so it would be good if we have another secretary, at least for to take notes while Ed is presenting. Anyone? Any volunteer? Once.
Thank you, John.
Okay, and last slide is the milestones review. We have a lot of things to do. But they all depends on BPBIS, so I think we should have Scott to provide us the latest update, I guess, from the interim meeting, right?
It's completely useless. The batteries are dead.
Okay, so I've got, I think, just 3 or 4 slides here. And just a quick recap of the latest changes to the BPBIS specification. Next slide. We had an interim meeting by conference call in September, and these are the items that came out of that meeting as I remember them. That this is the consensus of the meeting, is that the remaining things to do on the spec were there was a request to add a note that the flexibility in encoding that the specification contemplates is not to be interpreted as encouraging galloping complexity in adding fancy new features to the specification. There was a proposal to add a CBOR data definition language expression of the specification in an appendix. There was a decision to omit, to revise the way CBOR representation was expressed in the specification, and specifically removing the additional information and details, and letting the details of the CBOR representations be determined by the implementations, because the implementations should be able to decode properly whichever, regardless of like leading zeros or whatever were inserted by the encoding library, and also to use the CBOR Boolean type rather than unsigned integer for Boolean values. We, I believe, reached an agreement to remove what was termed the rerouting service from custody transfer. So now custody transfer is quite explicitly defined in the specification as a timeout-driven retransmission mechanism with some additional signaling to assist in the computation of the timeout intervals, and also to inform the current custodian when there's some reason that the forwarding that ought to be done by the receiving node can't be done. And that's going back to the original set of custody transfer reason codes. Oh, and then going along with that, the idea of replacing essentially the rerouting service with an additional status flag saying the node refused custody of bundle. As it turns out, as I was going through the text, it was easier to do that and made more sense to do that in my mind in the first flag in the status reports rather than in the that's an additional status flag, but it comes to the same thing. And next slide. I think the one other thing that that I found as I was going through it was,
And that works.
oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, how nice. I found that I had encoded a CBOR object called fragment ID, combining a couple of things that occurred frequently in the specification as a structure, and had written that up incorrectly as the fragment offset and the original payload length, when it ought to have been the fragment offset and the fragment length that defines the fragment. Okay, next slide.
You can do it on there.
Oh, I can do it on here. Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so the revised specification was posted on the 29th of October. And as of the time I put these slides together, the comments that I had gotten were these comments from Carlo Caini at University of Bologna. He pointed out an error in, oops. Huh.
I think it's looped. Try that.
Ah, there we go. Okay. There it is, better. Okay. That in 422, the definition of the primary bundle block, the payload length is part of the ID of the fragment, and that there's some informative text there that needs to be fixed. He suggested that the list of major modifications should include moving quality of service to an extension block, which seems reasonable. I mean, it is a major change. He suggested that when we're talking about BPSec in this document, that we should just talk about BPSec rather than refer to the specific BPSec blocks, the bib and BCB. And a topic that he brought up in his comments, but didn't think that it was something that we should try to wrestle with here, was rethinking the accuracy of clocks and whether there were whether it was more than a two-valued logic that the clocks were accurate or not, and that the bundle age block was either needed or wasn't, and there might be some, the clock might be semi-accurate, and there may be some gradations in there. I think that's opening a can of worms that we could spend years on. So I would propose we acknowledge that question has been asked and move on. And that's all of my slides. Are there any questions or comments on the specification? I should point out, I've also gotten some more comments, mostly editorial, from Kevin, and I haven't gotten anybody else's comments. If there are some, please send them on.
Can I add at this point, this document is heading fast towards last call, so we need comments now to make sure that we are ready for last call on this, because this is a charter item and is an integral part of the working group's work. So if you haven't read it, please read it and then get some good comments out, even if they're just editorial nits. Or
even if it's just, it's okay. I mean, a comment that says it's okay as it is, that's fine. It's good to have something.
Yeah, there's some power spikes.
A little, it didn't merit a comment that I gave you, but I'll just throw it out there for people to pay.
Can you state your name, please?
Kevin Fall, Nepheli Networks. The section that describes deferred, I think it's custody deferred or something like that. Is the
delegated.
Delegated, yeah. That one.
Yeah.
Relative to the history of things, it seems like that was somewhat newer.
It is, yeah,
and
definitely.
So I would might suggest people that are going to go read it, do read that part, because it's different than some stuff that had been there before. It gave me a little bit of concern, but I didn't actually formulate something usful to say just yet.
That's a good idea, because that is new. It is it's something that Keith Scott suggested, I think at the Berlin meetings. And the intent there is, since custodial retransmission depends on expiration of a timeout, to the extent that the timeout expiration interval can be, the accuracy of that interval can be improved, the efficiency of the retransmission mechanism should be improved. So the intent of that delegation message is to provide additional information to the current custodian about future transmission that the custodian can use in conjunction with other information to figure out a timeout interval.
The nature of my concern, which again, I didn't think about it hard enough to formulate the comment, was you get in a situation where your bundle that requests custody goes through a number of nodes and they all wind up generating something of this nature. I didn't know.
And none of them take custody.
Yeah. And so that you wind up with this amplification problem of an unbounded amount. But I didn't know if that really happens. So that was, I guess.
Nobody's tried it yet, so there's the way to know. Good point, though. Anything else? This may be a really quick presentation. You may be able to move on to the next agenda item.
Go ahead.
What I was going to add as a sort of follow-up question to the room, and then we'll take it to the list, is: do we think this draft is ready for last call? Does anyone believe there are any major showstoppers in here? Does anyone think they haven't looked hard enough yet? Okay, so I see one hand for someone who wants to do a proper review.
Well,
I should look forward to that, Ronald.
Well, during the working group last call, that's the time to review the document. I think what we're trying to get here is any showstoppers or anything big that is remains to be discussed, or are we stable as a spec? And then working group last call is the time to do a detailed review and send comments. It's not yet done for comments. It's just that, are we stable enough? Because the previous discussion brought additional changes, but it seems now we're pretty stable. We haven't seen, so here's the chance to say, no, there's something broken still and we need to fix it. And if not, then maybe that's the right time to do working group last call. So the co-chairs try to get the feeling of the room or the working group in about, all right, is this document ready for working group last call?
Do you want a hum? Show of hands? Let's do a hum. So the hum is, if you think this document is ready for last call, hum now. Okay.
The inverse version.
If you do not think this document is ready for last call, hum now. Well, okay. Obviously, we'll take the question to the list, but that sounds pretty positive for last call to me.
Great. That'd be great.
Who's next? Oh, I have an agenda here somewhere.
You're asking me too many questions too
Yeah,
fast.
sorry.
I think it was Ed, but
I think it's Ed next, isn't it? Which is...
yes, BP6.
There's a flicker there. It should go left and right on the red buttons.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ed Brain, and I'm going to talk about updates to bundle protocol security, BPSec, updates from the last IETF. So we did not have many updates from last IETF. There was some editorial cleanup, particularly around the idea of multi-target blocks. For those who are familiar, BPSec defines two kinds of extension blocks for security, an integrity block and a confidentiality block. Originally in the spec, there was a one-to-one notion between blocks and the blocks that they target, the blocks that they provide integrity or confidentiality for. At the last IETF, we added the concept of multiple targets for a security block to avoid the redundant collection of key information and other information. And with multi-target blocks, if the security source and the operation and the key information is all the same, then you can have a list of targets and not repeat all of that other key information coming forward, which was somewhat of a compromise between a one-to-one between security blocks and having all blocks have all multiplicity across all security sources. So we cleaned up some of that some of that verbiage. And then the other was in the document, we actually had it listed erroneously as informational. We did not want this to be informational, and so we moved the document type to a standards track document. Finally, 2 IETFs ago, we removed the concept of a third security block, which was a cryptographic message syntax block, and that was something that we had agreed on in this room, in this working group. And but we decided that cryptographic messaging syntax may be useful, and one of the things that we would want to do is allow some additional specs, perhaps at a later time, to come in and define their own security blocks, but to do so in a way that doesn't perturb BPSec. We wanted to add some rules and guidance on how to define other security blocks and stay conformant with BPSec. And then sort of lastly, really, we aren't tracking any significant items of change for BPSec other than we will track BPBiz, and if there are any changes in BPBiz that affect BPSec, obviously we'll react to those. So in particular, the remainder of this presentation goes over the guidance that we provided if you're going to define other security blocks in a different document. And this is the guidance provided by BPSec. For the authors of those other standards. And there are roughly, I think, 6 of them. And some of these should be sort of non-controversial, right? If you're defining another security spec, you really can't override the identifiers that have been defined here. You can't say, well, I want a bib, and it will work differently than your bib, and so I'm going to override the block type codes, for example. Additionally, you must address how your OSB will interact with the BPSec blocks. What does that mean? In the BPSec specification, we took great care in understanding the process order of what blocks could target other blocks, and that processing order must also be addressed in any new specification. Particularly, can the new block be the target of a BIB or a BCB, or can it itself target BIBs and BCBs? If the OSB can be the target of a BIB or a BCB, it requires canonicalization because you have to create, obviously, a stream for this to feed it into a cipher suite. If you do not want to use the standard extension block canonicalization algorithm provided in BPSec, you then have to define your own. And then if such a canonicalization algorithm is provided, it has to be used always and not conditionally based on some other state. We must maintain a deterministic processing order that's compatible with the BPSec processing order. This came out of some of the original understanding of BSP and SBSP, where there were cases where the processing order of whether you would choose to evaluate an integrity block or a confidentiality block could be reversed based on order in the bundle or fragmentation or other kinds of issues. And one of the things that BPSec wanted to get away from was obviously any kind of ambiguity there. So BPSec defines a deterministic processing order, and any OSB must fit itself within that deterministic processing order. A general catch-all statement that says you really can't change any of the security processing requirements in BPSec. And then also as guidance, any other security block must address fragmentation. And this was a significant cause of headaches when we worked through first SBSP and then BPSec as we worked through several of the fragmentation cases. In particular, how do you process bundles that represent fragments? How do you handle an OSB in a bundle that may no longer, due to fragmentation, contain its security target? Or whether you can even add an OSB to a bundle that is a security, or that is a bundle. So all of these cases are cases that have been handled in the BPSec document itself, and they also have to be addressed in any other kind of security specification that comes forward. So by adding these 6 or 7 items of considerations and requirements for other security blocks to be considered compliant with BPSec, I think we've sort of handled the case of, if somebody at a later time feels very strongly about adding the cryptographic message syntax as a capability into a bundle, we have a framework where they can do that that doesn't change this specification and also gives the rules and requirements for making sure that it doesn't break other deployments of BPSec that perhaps don't always use or process CMS blocks. And that's about it. There were a couple other small changes, nits and editorial. There were some open questions from the last IETF. Should BPSec provide its own encoding? This was at a time before we had said that BPBIS would use the CBOR encoding. So I think the answer to that is no, BPSec should not provide its own encoding. It should follow the BPBIS encoding. Does BPSec really need blocks transmitted in a particular order? No, it does not need blocks transmitted in a particular order. So the claim is that with addressing the removal of CMS blocks, I think that we've covered all of the open issues associated with BPSec. In the last IETF, we added the security policy and cipher suite authorship considerations. We've added the multi-target blocks to reduce any duplicity in the key information. And we've created the extensibility mechanism if someone wants to add additional security blocks on their own. And other than making sure that we track BPBIS, if there are any changes there, I think we're pretty close to done on this one. So that's what I have. Unless there are, that's all I have on BPSec, unless there are questions. And then
I have a question, Ed, and it's a sort of a question to the room as well. With the OSB conformance section, you have IANA requests for type code assignments, and quickly looking over my shoulder at the document, you ask IANA to reserve values in there.
we do.
Now that means reserved for the IETF to assign. Where are you suggesting that we reserve a different set of numbers within the IANA assigned numbers for third-party public. My question, I suppose, is what numbers are these OSBs going to use, and who defines whether they clash or not? Who's going to? Are you telling them to go to IANA for the registration?
So there are two questions. The first is, how do you identify a different kind of security block? And so much like the BIB and the BCB, a security block is an extension block in the bundle protocol, and it's identified by its block type code. Mm-hmm. So just as BIB and BCB would have their own assigned block codes, block type code, any other security block written by any other participant would need to go and register a new block type code. And we do not see I see no usefulness in pre-reserving a set of codes for potential other security blocks, because there may be 0 or there may be 1. I don't know how many there would be.
Okay.
But I think the process of registering another OSB would be the same as anyone who would generate another extension block type.
Fine.
Then the other observation around BPSec was that there are 3 drafts. I think at this point they're expired, but their information is not stale. They just need to be re-upped. There is a Suite B cipher suite and profile for BPSec that needs to be updated, and we're trying to target getting that done by the next IETF to bring them into conformance with BPSec and BPBiz. And then lastly, there is a security best practices document where we are attempting to capture common security use cases and discuss how you could achieve those use cases with combinations of BP, bundle and bundle encapsulation, BPSec, and other standards that are related. The concept being back from the beginning when we generated BPSec was to try and separate out the protocol from the policy to its application for security services. So a question that I have is, I see these kinds of standards as nice to haves in general, but I don't see them as required to standardizing the BPSec itself. So I guess my question to myself or to the room would be, do we think that BPSec has dependencies on these or other standards, or do we think the only dependency on BPSec is BPBiz?
I have my own view as well.
John Dowdle, Airbus. Is it worth just republishing these as informational, as examples of this is how you can do it?
Oh, absolutely, and I don't think they should. I don't think they should fall off the edge, and I think they are useful. But they are useful for people who want to deploy BPSec in certain areas. But I don't think they should hold up, for example, the standardization of BPSec itself.
No, I think I'd be inclined to agree with that.
One answer to the question is, what are the documents necessary for an implementer to actually implement this stuff, right? So if those documents are not necessary, then they're not necessary.
Yep. Okay. Well, that is all that I have for BPSec.
Quick remark. When you, and that applies to everybody, but when you request IANA, if you request a new registry, then you can define, what the registry look like and all the numbers you want to pre-assign. But when it's an existing registry and you want to add values, then usually we don't put the values because that's IANA to actually define the values.
Oh, right.
So detail, but
okay. No, I'll if
put
that gets captured in the notes, I'll take them.
To be done or something, and then IANA will actually allocate the actual values, because there are multiple streams coming, so they don't unless you have a specific reason for a specific number because it's a bit pattern or something, then you can ask a specific. But
no, for the block type code's not.
Yeah.
So I'll make that change. Cool. Thank you.
So next up we have Brian Sipos. If he's remoting in, so I hope you can hear us, Brian. If somebody's on Jabber while I try and find his slides. Which one is his? I don't have his slides. They're his own slides. I'll have to download them. Sorry. Sorry, I'll try and work out how to make Meet Echo work. Right.
I remember there was kind of something
There's a
that
magic thing we have to press.
to mute the attendee. Okay. Okay, we need to push on the red button. Nuclear explosion.
Yeah.
Woo! Ask him to talk.
Brian, can you try talking and we'll see if you're coming through? Oh, what do? I now have to try pressing it again.
Great.
We've got you, Brian.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. So the presentation is short and hopefully reflects that the protocol is now also short and simple. So first slide, please. Or next, I should say. This presentation is just reviewing some of the changes since last interim IETF. And we can go to the next slide and discuss some basics on the protocol. These next two slides, I think, are carryovers from earlier presentations, but they just are reiterating the background for this revised TCP/CL, really just to address some very specific issues that came up in the earlier version. And point number 3 is what was discussed in the last interim IETF, which was to simplify the protocol itself and simply remove variability in sequencing options from TCP/CL, because the only reason why there was variability was for some amount of backwards compatibility with earlier unreleased versions. So next slide, please. And the major goal of the change is to not change the scope or workflow of the transfer protocol. It's intended to be very simple and straightforward, not have a lot of choices to it, and get bundles from one end of the connection to the other end of the connection. This means that there is a lot of reuse of existing type codes and reason codes. There are some additional type codes and reason codes added to handle specifically the use of TLS and the ability to reject individual messages on the protocol. But majority of those types and reasons are unchanged. And next slide, please. So since the interim meeting and since TCP/CL v3, there is now no variability in message sequencing. At this point, every bundle transfer begins with a length message, continues with data segments for the size of the bundle to be transferred, and always contains acknowledgement messages. One change since the last draft was to remove all use of SDNV values. Everything now in TCP/CL before is either fixed length or is a string with a size identifier that is itself fixed length. The changes from the prior draft to do with TLS is also to simplify things. Now there is only a very simple handshake that if both sides of the connection indicate that they support TLS, a negotiation begins immediately after the contact header handshake. And so there's no opportunity to get into any kind of a race condition during the negotiation that was brought up against the earlier draft. There is now what's called a transfer ID. In the earlier draft, it was called a bundle ID, but this avoids ambiguity. Transfer ID is really nothing to do with the bundle contents itself. It just identifies transfer within the TCP/CL. And it's not mentioned on this slide, but there's also a name change that was mentioned at the last IETF, that a TCP connection is made, which is then used by a TCP/CL session. So just again to disambiguate things, TCP/CL session is what happens on top of the TCP connection. And the only additional negotiated parameter from TCP/CL v3 is in the contact header, the ability to indicate the maximum receive unit size for segments and for transfers as a whole. So this would allow the endpoints to, in a sense, negotiate how large the segments can be. And in the case where a receiver really genuinely can have single segment transfers, the segment size can be set to the maximum 64-bit value, and everything would all go in one segment. So it effectively turns the whole bundle transfer into a single stream. And changes from TCP/CL v3 and even earlier drafts of v4 are now there are almost no options for branching the protocol. It's at this point a very fixed sequence of operations that happens from both sides, both the sender and the receiver. So next slide, please. And the last draft was submitted is an actual IETF working group draft, and it's at version 0 right now. And I had mentioned it in an earlier presentation, but I have a working implementation that has been updated for the IETF draft. And I stuck in one final slide at the end just discussing that. If we can skip to the next, please. The only comments here are about that this just really represents a proof of concept as far as just showing the simple sequencing that's involved to use either endpoint of a TCP/CL connection as an initiator of a bundle transfer, and all of the receive sizing and queuing logic. And this is really just in order to provide some amount of running code to go along with the working group consensus. But at this point, the protocol is, I think, quite simplified even from earlier drafts and v3, which is good based on the feedback that came out of the earlier IETFs. And I think that's the end.
Questions?
Can I ask a question then? How many people have read this latest copy of the draft? We have one hand. Thank you. Can I ask you, this is an important document because really bundle protocol, BP, BIS can't really move forwards without at least a convergence layer defined. Neither can BPSec. So we need to make sure that we can get this moving towards last call as fast as possible. So can you please just find a little bit of time to review, read, comment to make sure we've got this right. Brian's done a great job in trying to keep this simple, which is a huge advantage, but it really does need some good review comments. So can I flag that up?
Yeah, one thing that I specifically omitted from the draft is any actual minimum requirements on TLS cipher suite. Although the latest draft does include a reference to the current IETF best practices for TLS as far as what versions of the protocol to use, what options to avoid, what options are recommended. But it does not right now specify a minimum cipher suite. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that needs to happen.
Brian, I'm segue your question to, and then looking at the AD in the room. Dear Spencer,
Who's ignoring us?
the current policy in the IETF is encrypt everywhere, right? Every protocol. And so DTN as a BPSec as optional, and then the convergence layer as TCP as TLS as optional. Is this going to fly in the ISG, or do we have to do something before?
And there are also privacy concerns possibly over two parties are now having a bundle protocol conversation. Do we have privacy concerns here as well as just security concerns?
So Spencer Dawkins speaking as AD and doing my best to channel 14 other people, at least 2 of whom are SEC ADs. I believe the right answer here is that in order to not encrypt everything everywhere, you really are kind of talking about security considerations that explain that. If I could just back up 1 second, it used to be that we didn't produce protocols and transport that were not safe for the internet. Now we do, but with very clear sections of the document that say when you can do this and when you can't. Basically because this transport protocol, this tunneling protocols usually are not safe over the general internet. Okay, if you guys think you can pull off a, and please make it short, convincing security consideration section that does explain, what the exposures are basically, I would be willing to take that to the ISG. Okay.
Then the next question is, where should we discuss that? Because BP is there, then you have a convergence layer below, right? Then there will be multiple convergence layer below, and we are, essentially now taking the main one, which may be not the right one for space communications, but that's another discussion.
Sure.
So where are the security considerations should be put, given that BP as the optional BPSec, and then the convergence layers may have or may not have security, like TLS or something. So where do we put this?
So I'm doing pretty well with no jet lag today. So the answer that I would give you would be to put that in the base protocol spec, because all the deployments are going to be running at least that. And it sounds like there may be no other spec that all the deployments are running. Is that true?
That's actually the possible outcome is
Okay.
BP, not BP spec, and convergence layer that may not have any security. So you're right.
Okay, cool. So that's where I would put in the security considerations for the base protocol. And if you wanted to break that out and have some of it as privacy, that might make a couple of security directors, area directors happier. I can't promise you we will not have a conversation, but I can promise you that I will do my best to represent that if that's what you all are able to put together.
Well, I'm just trying to get the sense of the ISG
Sure.
given the current policy and what we should do to.
Yeah, and if we hadn't had a conversation on Monday morning, I would have told you more, like what you asked the question about. So this is still wiggling around a little bit. It's in the are we really saying this discussion level within the ISG with the IEB. So my guidance would be to do the right thing.
Could we ask our nice ED to start that conversation with the security EDs before? So, or are we doing by ourselves and then later find that now you need default?
I think we need some early input on this.
I would be happy to take first draft text and talk to them
Okay.
My suggestion is not to start a conversation like that without sending text, because they have really lurid imaginations, and that needs to go into the minutes.
Can I also point out on the back of this, this is now a working group draft, which means it's the responsibility of the working group to get the security considerations right. We can't all just look at Brian and expect him to get it all right.
Right, but what Spencer is doing into the bundle protocol spec.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
sorry. When
So
you
that's-
said the base protocol, I got confused. I thought base as in bottom rather than base as in bundle protocol.
No, that's the whole point I was trying to make. With,
So,
so I got
so
confused.
we'll have the base protocol at the top, and this will make perfect sense to everyone. I'm signed up for that.
Okay. So where does that cross over with what we've just said about ED's bundle BPSec best practices documents as informational? So is some of the content of the best practices document actually relevant to security considerations within BPBIS?
yeah, that might be. Yeah.
So if I was trying to make, if I was trying to do presentation layer stuff to make the security community, I don't want to blame it on the ADs. If I was going to try to do presentation layers there, try to make this more understandable. Are you all talking about sending those two specifications forward roughly in tandem?
That's actually another question for you. we were thinking of having the bundle protocol itself,
Yeah.
and then the first convergence layer TCP altogether to the ISG, because one without the the TCP, the adaptation layer below would not be complete. Therefore, having one, we have others coming, but one will kind of get the package.
And
We were not necessarily thinking about having the BPSec, which is kind of similar to IPsec. We may not. That's a discussion point, but at least we were framing as the first package being bundle protocol and the convergence layer being sent to the ISG.
So it seems like, well, okay, two things. If you do this and have, basically go look over there for the best current practices, you've really created a normative dependency that's going to hold the base protocol up for that anyway.
Yeah, right.
And
extracted.
and my concern about that would be that you'd end up sticking stuff that should be in the best current practices draft in the base protocol specification to get IETF consensus for that. And like I said, I shouldn't be blaming the security guys for this. They're doing their job. But in order to get IETF consensus for that, it seems like to me you don't want to put stuff in the base protocol specification draft that goes in the other draft.
Okay. And there's already a security consideration section in the base spec. So it's already there. Then the question is, are we answering the right questions given the policy of everything encrypted? So that was
like I say, for Spencer, the everything encrypted is basically this is where we think the world is best off if we do that. But that's not to say that everybody can do that all the time in all environments. So, and you all are kind of at the challenged environment end of the spectrum. So being able to say, we may need to relax some of the things that we would do over the open internet, over a well-connected open internet, because of the capability of the devices we're talking about and because of the nature of the deployments. But like I said, getting that very clearly, this is what we recognize what's being exposed there, and here's the list of what that is, and here are the privacy considerations of what that mean, what exposing that means. Does that help?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I'm glad we didn't have this conversation on Saturday.
So taking it back a step, what I understood from that is, from Brian's perspective, having TLS capability is great, and it's in there, but the main security considerations need to be addressed in bundle protocol itself. So Brian hasn't wasted his time, and it's valuable work.
Yeah.
But that's not the security underpinning of the whole stack. It's in bundle protocol.
As I understand the relationship, you're saying basically that the BPSec is a document that people might not need to read.
Right.
Because in some deployments. And so telling people telling people to go look at another document that they wouldn't have to read to see what the impact of not reading that document is, doesn't seem as helpful to me as some other things that I've done. I've tried it both ways.
Scott?
Scott Burley. What I'm taking from this is we have a section in BPBIS spec now that is essentially inherited unchanged pretty much from ROC 5050. What we need to do is revisit that section and make sure that it does the things that Spencer was asking it to do.
Yep.
And that section will reference BPSec, because where it says you will do security, that's how you will do it. But it will not be necessary to read the BPSec document to know what those considerations are. They'll be in that section of the BPBIS specification. Okay, then the last point then on that is this is not an area of expertise for me, so I would encourage somebody to or anybody who's interested in doing it to undertake that review of that text as soon as possible, since we want to try to get this on to last call.
Yep. I think the answer we need to give is essentially why are not encrypting all the time, at the BP layer. So therefore, why BPSec is optional, right? I think that's roughly what the answer.
I can take a crack at that, but people have
Sure.
they should pass on.
As I've said before, it's a working group document, which means it's all of our responsibility to get this right. So if somebody wants to help Scott with this, who's written security considerations before or fancies a crack at it, it sounds like Scott's asking for help.
And please get that as right as you can in this working group. The other thing I was going to say was that with pretty much all the area review teams these days, you can ask for early review from them without going to IETF last call yet. So if you think that this is going to be a conversation that's going to be pretty intense between the reviewer and the working group, you can do that where it's not, not having that conversation in front of the entire rest of the IETF.
Hi, this is Ed Brain, APL. Two things. One, just to clarify on the security best practices document, and I think Spencer already said this, but I'd already gotten up to stand in line, so I figured I would just confirm, was that we were looking for that to be more of a recipe book for how to get things done, and would therefore probably want to be driven by the security policies and not a driver of the security policies. Okay. So I think the dependency would go the opposite way. The other comment was in BPSec, in order to convince ourselves that BPSec was covering the kinds of issues we think would be manifest in a security way for bundle protocol, we did some analysis of that and put it into the security considerations of BPSec, and then use that to then explain why we thought BPSec was covering those. It's possible that we could start with a review of those and maybe pull some of that text out of BPSec and put it into BP, and maybe that would be a good starting point.
And I think once that work is underway, we'll try and engage with the security ADs early to say, because we're trying to keep the pace on this and get to last call. But as Spencer suggested, starting that process before last call can only help. Okay, so I think it's Ed up again on AMA, AMP.
Okay, my name is Ed Brain, APL, talking about asynchronous management architecture and protocol updates. So this is a little something different. The network management work for DTN has been going on in some way for a couple of years now. We had started putting together some specifications with the idea that network management is an important part of a deployed challenge network. And I wanted to bring everyone up to speed on both the status of some of the implementation work that we've been doing and also the standards work. And we've been trying to keep all of the standards fresh to the working group, published as internet drafts, with the thought that perhaps at a later time, the working group would adopt some of this. So agenda, right, we'll get to all of that. So, okay, so the motivation behind this. We started looking at several deployment opportunities for DTN. Obviously, some of the space deployments where signal propagation delays were important were there. And then there were some deployments associated with frequent link disruptions in challenged or denied environments. And actually a emerging and perhaps dominating case has been what I call the link access disruptions, which are as a matter of congestion or policy or quality or administrative boundary or something else, you're denied access to the link for a reason other than physics. The end result from a user perspective is you're operating in a degraded or challenged mode, and how do we perform management in that situation? So with those observations, we came back and said, how do we do network management if we assume that we're on the far side of the delay or the disruption, even if the disruption is based man-made and not physics-based? And we said in those cases, perhaps network management looks a lot like fault management, and perhaps network management looks a lot like autonomous control. So at the time, and this was in 2011 to 2013, we did some literature review. We started looking at, obviously SNMP and NetConf, the Armon, and so on. And we said in our deployments at the time, those really weren't sufficient to get done what we needed to do. We started looking more expansively at some engineering approaches to fault protection and autonomy. And we looked at mobile code scripting schemes, rule-based engines, and so on. And we had some requirements that were associated with this. We had to have something that was deterministic in its processing. We had to have something that didn't necessarily generate mobile code or things that had security concerns. We needed something that could be run on very resource-constrained devices, obviously spacecraft, but some robotics platforms, IoTs, and so on. We came up with something that was a large monolithic document called the Delay Tolerant Network Management Protocol, or DTNMP. And it was published to the DTNRG, and NASA started an initial implementation on it still last year. We renamed it to the Asynchronous Management Protocol and broke it into a protocol and an architecture document, which was a bit of a manifesto on the need for asynchronous management and what that means, because in our literature reviews, we weren't able to find a good definition of what asynchronous management means and how we should consider it. And then this year, we are having some discussion with folks from other areas and look as they look at RESTful interfaces for network management. What is the overlap associated with that? And that has caused us to adapt our model in ways that I think are very helpful. So at the end of the day, we said that if we're going to tackle the concept of asynchronous network management, we need to do three things. We need to understand what we mean when we say asynchronous network management. So a definition and perhaps an architecture to pull those concepts together. And the claim is that the asynchronous management architecture, which is published as an internet draft, performs that function. Just for my own help, who in this room has read the AMA document? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So a couple. We then said we needed a common data model associated with this. What are the primitives? What is the lingua franca of this system? Some models here. It has to be somewhat bit efficient where it is necessary. We can't generate something that's very flexible, but can't go to some of the resource constrained devices. And we're trying to make the data model completely independent of the transport protocol. Obviously, one of the initial users of this would be deployments that need things like DTN, but we've also been in talks with folks who have different issues and different transport protocols and like the automation piece. And we had something called, at the time, an application data model. And we believe that a template and individual, pardon my typo, attempts to address that. And then finally, a protocol, at least one protocol that implements the data model in conformance with the architecture and suitable for these kind of deployments. And maybe there are other protocols out there that implement the data model and the architecture for different kinds of deployments as well. And we claim that the initial one, the AMP, the Asynchronous Management Protocol, handles that. So everything that I've just said taken graphically looks a bit like this, where we have just some other documents here that says we believe that to do this correctly, we need some specs that deal with architecture, we need some specs that deal with data model, and we need a protocol in certain deployments. We may need a protocol if we can't use existing protocols. To that effect, the AMA is out and published. Request is, please read this if you're interested in this topic. The data model, we have not in green, pending drafts in green. We've not pulled together an overarching ADM template. Something that has just come out in the past few months was that that would be a good idea, and it would be extracted out of information that's already in the AMA and AMP. What we have done is we have started building individual ADMs and publishing them. So there are internet drafts now for an overall AMP agent ADM, a bundle protocol ADM, and a BPSec ADM. And we are currently writing a CGR LTP and an ION ADM. And then in addition to this, once we have a general template, which is a generalization of these in conformance with Yang, because we would like to model these in Yang, because we think that that is a wise thing to do for a variety of reasons. The AMP specification using, driven by DTN and CBOR would implement the kinds of agent ADMs and other ADMs in conformance with the architecture. And there is an implementation now in ION open source and another implementation coming forward in DTN2. I think this is scheduled over the next year so that we can get some interoperability and start using this in different ways. So if we come back and say, if we go through architecture, data model, and protocol in turn, the AMA, what is the architecture? We said that network management needs to do a couple of things. We started with performance monitoring, which is what network management meant to a lot of folks when we started looking at this in 2011, 2012. We went back to, I believe it was ISO and the FCAPS model. We sort of constrained it from there. And we said that there are 4 things that we have to be able to do if we're trying to asynchronously manage a device. We need to be able to configure the device in some way. We have to change the settings on some agent manually or autonomously. Autonomously being as a function of time, or autonomously being as a function of state. We have to be able to report on all of the various health keeping and performance attributes coming out of the agent. But we also want autonomous parameterized control. We would love to have RPCs in some way in this system. And then we would like some finer grained access beyond simple access to the link to say who is allowed to do what, because of course, once you get into RPCs, performance monitoring configuration, you have roles and responsibilities and things that look like access control. So if that's the definition that we're working with right now on asynchronous management, then what are the characteristics of a good solution in this space? So the first characteristic is we really want to push information and not pull information. Clearly in a challenged network, the round trip exchanges are not always possible. And clearly the session establishment goes against the asynchronous model. We would like, where possible, to minimize the message size. If we can pre-share schemas, if we can exchange binary data, at least for certain use cases, it's less memory, it's less CPU requirements, it's less need for constant comms to get the entire message over. it's less size of the message when you add other encryption and so on. Borrowing again from other traditional management schemes, you need to be able to absolutely identify data in a global way, but we also want to be able to customize data and only send what you need, as opposed to transmitting an entire data volume back to a manager and then having them sort through it once it's been transmitted. And then of course, the autonomous operation piece, which is the management has to continue even when the managers are no longer in connection with the agent. So there are a couple of pictures like this in the AMA document. We differentiate the role of manager and agent from the physical node itself. Certainly some nodes represent wholly managed devices, some nodes represent wholly managing devices, and some nodes in the middle can be a mixture of both, either where they're managing a subset of a network deployment, or they're a reporting head of a sensor network, or they're otherwise doing some data fusion here and then reporting that out to another manager down the road. And also part of this use case is that there's the simple use case of a manager talking to one or more agents, but there are the more complex use cases of multiple agents talking to multiple managers. And then there's the end state of doing in-network fusion of things like performance monitoring data as necessary. So the simple system model here is to have our agents, have our manager, have controls and reports come back in accordance with some application data model definitions. So for people who are familiar with the concept of MIBs, this is relatively similar. You know, the agents run on the managed devices. They are the things that do the configuration and reporting. They're the ones that implement the autonomy engines and the parameterized control. Managers deal with the data and the configuration, and more importantly, have the model of open loop control, because in an asynchronous model, we have to assume that we don't have closed loop control. And then the ADMs are well-named data and controls, and they add the kind of RPC information in addition to the well-named data. And actually, I think and Brian Sipos did create, I think, a Yang spec for ADMs, or at least one of the ADMs, and part of what we're trying to do over the next year is get the rest of them moved over. So where are we now with this? We've just published version 4, which had minor terminology and definitions updates. I think when Kevin Fall went through and read this, he had suggested that we change some terminology for clarity, which we've done. Really, the work that's left to do on the AMA document is not very much. We may, in creation of a separate ADM document, pull a little bit of that description out of the AMA so that it's not redundant. But really, the only thing that's left is remove some legacy references to SNMP, and then try and get the document out to review for the working group so that we can incorporate any other changes necessary for the definition of asynchronous management. If we then were to go into what is this application data model concept, it is these 9 types of information. So what we have said is that if you want to asynchronously manage a network, what you want to be able to do is define 9 kinds of information on that remote agent. And if you define those kinds of information on the remote agent, it should be able to go do its job without a manager in the loop and without closed loop control. And there are, walking through them, there's an initial set up top of information, of definitions that are immutable. They are defined in the ADM, which we perceive as a published spec, much like a MIB is a published spec, or a Yang model is a published spec. And that these definitions cannot be changed, and therefore you know that any agent that claims conformance to this ADM will understand these things in these ways with these names. Externally defined data, which is the name of a particular data item that can be computed by the agent and communicated back. Literals, operators, controls, and tables. So operators allow for the concept of defining mathematical operations. In particular, if you have ADMs that require, as part of their performance reporting or as part of other applications, mathematical expressions, moving averages, sums, other things, you can define that, and then others can start using those as they build expressions associated with that ADM. Controls are the command opcodes, the well-named command opcodes that you could send parameterized, much like an RPC call, to affect some behavior on the agent. and tables are familiar table concepts. I think anyone who's worked with network management understands tables. Then there is a set of information, reports, variables, and macros that are both can have mutable and immutable definitions, meaning that the ADMs may define immutable report, variable, and macro definitions that are available to everyone, and additionally, operators may on the fly define their own in the context of their network. Variables are just that, strongly typed variables that are combinations of external data, operators, and other variables. So you could have things like C is the average of A and B and D. And then reports, which are when I ask for this data, report 1, please give me items A and B and C, but not D. Macros, which are ordered sequences of controls to run. And then finally, from an autonomy point of view, and we don't really anticipate in the ADM defining rules that are immutable, because we couldn't think of any examples where you would define a rule that has to apply to everyone all the time. They sort of seem to be things that are relevant in a particular network deployment. But there are state-based rules and time-based rules. And time-based rules say with this periodicity or this particular time, execute this macro. And state-based rules are if a particular condition is true on the agent, then execute this macro. And so you could come back and generate, you could have macros that reset counts, that clear caches, that remove stale bundles, that rotate keys, that do other things that are useful to you in the context of your agent. And you could say, please do them every 3 months or every 6 months or every week, or alternatively, if this key has been used more than 10 times, then please rotate that key. The concept, therefore, behind the ADM is that if an agent supports 8, 9, or 10 different ADMs or 100 different ADMs, then that provides you the overall vocabulary from which you can construct the rules, the variables, reports, and the macros in the context of your system. So our claim in this is that this data model is the sort of simplest non-trivial data model necessary to do the kind of autonomous management that we would want on an agent. And pulling that out from the AMA and the AMP specifications into its own document to talk through these and how you would use them and where and examples of them, and a template and a Yang template for specifying them is a to-do item and something that we could get done in fairly short order, probably by the next IETF. Having said that, we do have different ADMs. As I said before, we have 3 that have been published, and we have 3 that are forthcoming. And I think I just said that again here. So in the current status, we are refreshing based on some of the terminology changes to make sure that they're all on the same page. We did put a table structure in over the past year. That was through some review and implementation, something we found was missing. We tried to get away from the table structure and say, could we do all of it with controls and the filters with controls? And we said that while we could, the processing and the data size burden of trying to do it that way was probably not worth just having the extra table type. And then making sure we migrate everything to Yang with an eye towards the CBOR encoding and pulling everything out into its own document, and perhaps asking for a registry of ADM identifiers associated with it. Then lastly, and briefly, the protocol itself is conformant to the AMA architecture. It implements agents, managers, and the ADM structures, specific data modules and types. It defines the messages by which controls and macros, by which controls are sent to agents and by which reports come back from agents, controls to add rules, to remove rules, to add and define macros and variables, and so on. It defines the basic types and compound types that are the basic high order types associated with the system. And then it has the functional specification, the headers, the trailers, how we lay out the individual messages, of which there are only 3 in the protocol. Register an agent, perform a control, and receive a data report. In terms of updates, again, some terminology updates. We have made some clarifications as we have external members of the community who have started to implement this. There, of course, have been a couple of questions that have come up nothing core to the protocol itself. And then we have added the table structures, some issues around how we handle expressions, type enumerations, and so on, and some specific removals. I'm not going to go too far into the AMP protocol itself at this point because it's not something that's overall been adopted, and so it still might be changed as we go through a review, and I've probably already talked for a fair amount of time. Also, who here by show of hands has read the AMP specification? Okay, so it's the 3 or 4. So right now, it has gone through a series of 2 or 3 implementation efforts. Most of them, honestly, in the space community. NASA has provided an open source implementation in the ION code base available on SourceForge. DLR has started creating an implementation. I believe that there are others on the phone who are pursuing an implementation. I think that Goddard is also pursuing an implementation. So we have gotten some implementer feedback on the protocol itself with questions on what does this mean and what does the spec mean, and have you thought through the implications of certain decisions that are made here. And based on that, we think we're pretty close to something that, at least amongst the implementer community, is reasonable. So lastly, if that took, yes. So from that review, the things that are left to do is, with any rule-based system, you need to understand, how do I make sure that the rule firings are dampened so that they don't just fire every second or every period. Typically the way that's done is some sort of threshold. A condition has to be true n out of m times, or something's only allowed to execute once before it's being reset, or something that executes and automatically enables or disables itself. So we are pursuing adding into the agent ADM actually ways to dampen these rules and whether there is any protocol that needs to be there. Changing our type data collection column IDs to be any types for our tables, so that table IDs don't just have to be integers or strings. They can be of any type to help with type checking of filters on tables. And then finishing up access control lists and making sure that AMP transitions over to a CBOR encoding as well. And that's where we are. So we are asking for review for the reference implementations. It is a bit of an ecosystem that we've put together, but we think that it is, we did spend a fair amount of time at the beginning trying to justify to ourselves why one needed a new thing. And coming back to an architecture where we could not find an architecture has been a useful thing to do. Defining a data model where we have not found a similar data model, we think has been a useful thing to do. And then having a protocol that is suitable for highly constrained applications that implements that data model in that architecture, we think for certain communities is also a useful thing to do. So with that, and then I'll stop there. Unless you want to see a lot of old slides as to what OIDs look like and things that are pulled out of the spec. So that is a sort of a status of where we are with asynchronous management. The request is please go look at the drafts, the 2 major ones, AMA and AMP, and are there any questions?
I have a question. Do we have any Yang gurus in the room or online who would be interested in assisting with the work to move the ADM model over into slightly more Yang, or using Yang? And does the working group think that is worthwhile? Is the working group happy with saying, well, we'll do this asynchronous management thing, it's clever and it works really well for DTN, and we don't really care about Yang because we're DTN? Or do you think we should be playing better with the rest of the IETF and try and reuse some of the clever stuff that's going on with Yang in the wider community, if it means revisiting some of the work that's already been done? And that's an open question.
Hi, Eric Voigt. I'm liking what I've seen out of the AMA and AMP architecture. I do a little bit of Yang. I'd be happy to review. I wouldn't necessarily have the context to do some of the ADM's work. One thing I have learned in the Yang work is that having a set of objects and a syntax is extremely useful for allowing conversing between different contexts. I think just yesterday in one of the security groups, we were able to say, oh, these are the same ideas, these are the same objects, these are the same models that we've seen in other contexts, and that's led to the potential for unifying things that couldn't have been unified other ways. When I look at this, I see some very cool stuff. I also see some harder problems which would be coming and would be easier to solve if you have an existing context. One of the examples would be knowing what the allowable rules could be in order to figure out what rules am I going to have common and maybe reusable and callable, and what would be even possible to put in as a rule in a particular platform, because maybe there's constraints where one platform would support it and another platform wouldn't. Understanding the syntax and what the allowable iterations of that syntax are viable in a particular context, it would be really useful to use an existing syntax in order to be able to constrain some of these things that wouldn't have been constrainable before. So I think that's a long answer that I think it's useful, and without those other extension points, you're going to run into some harder problems.
Magnosha, so you did kind of a MIB++ in some ways, right? With additional semantics in some, yeah. Have you looked at what Yang could do and what is not in Yang, or is there any reason not using Yang in general?
So my and I defer to anyone here on MeetEcho who has more familiarity with Yang. I do not. I gave a cursory review of Yang and said I see RPC, I see type data definitions, and so I think that it is a reasonable, with what I understand today, I think it is a reasonable way to model the ADMs that come out. The concern was for particular resource constrained deployments, do we want string names and other processing protocols and so on, but I think that's a different issue. And if we say that CBOR encoding is good in our DTN use cases, and we can take Yang models and generate serializations of them to CBOR and back again, and to the extent that whether it's specified in Yang or not, we can make implementations that don't require too much RAM or CPU processing for very constrained devices. I think that as a model, Yang is good.
You know, the constrained device topic is something, Magnosha again, is something, sometimes when you go into real detail implementation, you find, big issues for something that looks, just great. And then on the other end, the other thing that looks big, it's actually simple. So, we need to be careful about this, especially, complex system like that. Doing Yang would actually reuse a lot of stuff already available, including data models that could be applied maybe right away. And I don't know, I'm, doing OIDs again, it seems to be.
Oh, right. No, so.
Kind of last century.
So just to respond in a moment to the OIDs, we need a mechanism to finish up the naming of the data items that is both appropriate for folks that have a ability to tolerate large names, but then also we need a more compact encoding. But we might hear more about that, and if there is a naming ability, if there's an addressing ability that allows us to also get a naming ability, maybe that's how we solve that problem. So yeah, not thinking that SNMP and OIDs are what we have to do to name things. That's just a global name.
Just to add one thing that I really want to highlight as being cool, there's a problem with SNMP and OIDs and MIBs in that you actually have to, for every trap, you have to predefine what that trap is. You don't get to go ahead and create your own MIBs, your own traps, and have people understand and agree. With Yang, you kind of have the other extreme where you have a namespace and you can do any query you want on anything, but there's no predefined thing that's going to pull up what the combinations you care for are. What I like what is here is by having an ability to define your trigger, which can push off a result and a predefined report. Effectively, you're getting the benefit of the trigger plus the benefit of the flexible reporting with this, which is not really doable in other scenarios. And I think that's pretty nice.
Rick Taylor. I've been reading through the AMA and AMP stuff quite a lot and talking to Ed about this. And also particularly this IETF, I've been studying the Yang stuff for different reasons. But I actually can see how your AMP data models could be really quite simply defined in Yang, because the basic types are defined in Yang, the relationships between such things exist. So I could conceive a base ADM Yang data model, which can then just be enhanced or whatever the correct Yang-ism is, to say, and this is our data model that inherits off this. So you're generating ADMs for specific environments. Seems to be relatively simple, and that I see as the power of Yang, with the advantage of your reports and your variables and your triggers could just be encoded in Yang and therefore define what those triggers are. Now, how that is actually transmitted as data, i.e. the transport protocol and the encoding, is a different issue to the Yang, apart from, you're right, the naming. But there could be workarounds for that sort of stuff. So I'm in favor of doing the Yang work on this and opening out this asynchronous management to beyond just a DTN's problems.
Well, I agree with that. And just to echo what Mark said, I'm sure that when we try and do a Yang model of this, maybe some things are easy, some things are hard, it will uncover something. So even just the act of doing that to try and uncover would be useful. And like I said, I believe that Brian Sipos had started that mapping. Actually, I don't know if Brian is still on.
Brian's queuing. I'm going to try pressing the red button.
Okay.
Aha, Brian, you're live.
Yes, I'm back. Yeah, so in case of the AMA and AMP use of Yang, it really is completely decoupled from any relation with netconf and restconf and all those other things that also happen to use Yang. It used to be that they were the only users of Yang, and going ahead with using Yang as the syntax to model AMP data models, I think, is useful. And the only problem I can see with it is not a matter of technical limitations, because the Yang data model, the Yang modeling language is so very open-ended. It would be, my only concern would be more of if we've heard of any pushback from the ops working group as far as them saying, no, you really should not use Yang except for netconf.
I would be surprised.
I'd be very surprised if they push back against anyone using Yang. They seem quite keen on it.
Because anything that we're talking about using here is almost in a different universe from netconf, which I don't see any problem with.
So if I could ask a question out, is that if we do create the ADM template document and the Yang template for that, would you help?
Yes.
Am I allowed to ask that question?
Ask away. And can I ask a follow-on question, Brian? Ed said you'd had some prototype Yang data models you'd sort of tinkered around with. Are you willing to share them on the mailing list? Nothing formal. I'm not asking for a draft here. Just to share what you've got at the moment.
So there actually is, at this point, an expired internet draft for the Yang data model with an example, a couple of examples.
That's obviously one I didn't read. Sorry.
But it also, the currently expired draft is in a sense tied in with the AMP data structures, so there probably would need some touching up to accommodate CBOR, which I don't think is a bad thing either.
I heard through the grapevine, and I need to find out officially, I think there is a draft in one of the ops area groups of someone working on a CBOR encoding for either netconf or restconf. So they're looking at how to do the Yang conversion to CBOR elsewhere, which is great because that's less work for us.
Yeah, in that case, probably the only difference would come down to what Ed had just been mentioning, the identifiers, whether this is an OID or a string or something else. That's really what I see the fundamental assumption in the way that Yang is organized, that everything is identified by a string and in a way an XPath almost, whereas in AMP OIDs are the universal identifier.
Yeah. So can I ask a question to to Ed as the author, primary author on this? Are you proposing to bring this as a working group document for working group adoption, or are you continuing to work on it yourself and then bring it to working group adoption?
Oh no, my preference request would be that AMA, ADM, and AMP go to the working group so that they get the review that they need.
The problem,
if that's appropriate.
The problem is that the current charter is only requirement. So the architecture could be included, but we'd have to change the charter to milestones.
And that makes sense, is starting with the architecture and making sure that the definition and what we mean by asynchronous management, we have to agree on that first before we know the data model is right, before we know the protocol is right.
Okay, so that's probably a discussion for the list. Thanks, Ed.
Hey, thank you very much.
I'm pressing the button on Brian. Oh, he's gone. So next up we have John Dowdall for heterogeneous addressing. How are we doing for time? There's a flicker. It's got a pointer as well.
Hi, so I'm John. So this is a discussion which has been rolling on for a couple of IETFs now about how do we do addressing in DTNs, because it's not an obvious topic. So this is something that Rick and I have bashed together, but we've had some very long and involved conversations with Scott along the way as well, and we're very grateful for that. So if you look at the standards that are out there and the drafts that are out there, it's all basically around a URI scheme such as DTN colon blah or IPN colon blah or IPv6 or something else if you look in Fred's draft on numeric IDs. But the format of the address is not explicitly specified. So it's not kind of like IPv4, v6 where you can say, well, it's going to be looking like this. Now, organizations can and do, and for very good reasons, use different schemes of address. And so some examples I can think of off the top of my head, going back to the buses presentation I did at the last IETF, if you remember that, you could address a bus as maybe the physical bus itself, according to its registration number. You could address the bus that's on a particular service on a particular day. You could address the driver, or maybe you could address something else, or even where it is. So there's many ways in which you could form the address for the purpose that you have. And I think that was also something that Fred brought out in his paper. Some systems you can withstand long addresses, some systems you can't. So given that we don't really have a desire, or I don't have a desire personally, to standardize on any particular form of addressing, if you're going to send bundles from one area, I'll use the term loosely, that uses one particular scheme, if you're going to send it to an area which uses a different scheme, how are you going to do that? So the proposal here is basically allow you to keep your own addressing schemes, however you wish to use them. But if you're going to send to another an address with a different scheme, then you should have a function called a resolver, which does understand how to move that bundle. But the resolver needs to be in the address space that you occupy with the same scheme, so you know how to forward it. And in terms of forwarding, we're not going to say in this how it gets there. That's up to you in terms of your own routing protocol or whatever forwarding mechanism that you want to do it. So if the bundle has now arrived at the resolver, and the resolver goes, oh yeah, I know how to get that to the destination because I've heard about this other address scheme, it can send the bundle directly or to another resolver. If it goes, well, I'm not really quite sure, but I know this other resolver knows, or I think this other resolver knows, or even through perhaps a border gateway of some kind, which I'm not going to go into here really, between those two areas with the different addressing schemes. Namespaces. Please correct me as I go. So how are we going to do that? So given that, really start at the bottom of the slide, I suppose, primary block you can't change. So the primary block is the thing that says, this is how I'm going to get it from where it's starting to where it's going to end up. But it can now contain an address that you don't understand. So maybe add in another block that says, right, so this is how I get it from where I'm sending it from to the resolver, which is the first point. So those are now, contains a new address in it. So, and potentially you could, if it gets to the resolver, the resolver could swap that block out for another block, or it might choose to put another block in a kind of nested stacked fashion. You should only use them when the endpoint IDs can't resolve where they're going. And this is not normal routing. Okay, so this is kind of a thing on the top that kind of helps you to move it to somewhere that understands how to route it somewhere else. I guess as you go through the namespaces, you end up using several different routing algorithms as the bundle traverses the path. So this is kind of what an ERB looks like. Just some flags because we're sure that there will be some flags at some point, and it contains the two addresses. Potentially both of the endpoint IDs are optional, because if you're sending it from somewhere and that's your address, then maybe you don't put it in. But this is a work in progress. This is a think piece, and we're willing to take incoming on this. So let's just go back to the beginning and try and break that down. So there's a DTN node in a namespace that we'll call Alice, wishes to send a bundle to an endpoint in a namespace that we'll call Bob. So Alice uses a naming scheme of scheme A, Bob uses scheme B, and potentially, and this bit here is kind of important, we feel, you could address it through some kind of standardized traffic exchange mechanism, potentially, up for argument here. Could it be DTN : scheme B and / and then the name in scheme B? There's a slide potentially later on which we could explain that a bit more. So the sending node that's in this space, Alice, constructs the bundle primary block saying this is going from here to there. It's got the proper EIDs in it, but it can't resolve that locally, so it must go to the resolver. So the sending node and resolver share the same address space, the address scheme, sorry, they're in the same namespace. You add the endpoint resolution block to make it go to the resolver. And this is then going to the resolver via whatever routing topology you want to use. So as the block traverses its path, each node in turn looks at the ERB and decides what it wants to do with it. Does it want to throw it away? Does it want to add another one? What does it want to do?
Sorry, John, that's a typo. It should be as the bundle is forwarded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As the bundle is forwarded, not a block. And really sort of use the ERB to move the bundle across the space. Is that a question coming?
Yeah, God, yeah. I'm just wondering, didn't we have something like areas or zones some 15 years backish that yielded a two-level hierarchy of some sort that we disbanded for reasons I can't remember? And I'm wondering whether this looks like we're reintroducing something that we abandoned for other reasons. So I'm wondering whether we're going around in circles or whether we have more insights. I'm just curious.
Scott Burley, just offering a perspective on that. They were called regions.
Regions, right.
Regions, and I think that term actually is a valuable term that I would like to exhume and rehabilitate, but not for this, because I think there are two separate things that are distinct and separately important. One is the migration of the bundle into a namespace from which it can be to a node that is in the same namespace as the destination, so that routing can happen. And the other is that the topological routing itself might be, for scalability purposes, right? It might need to be something that is hierarchical and federated, and so we might need a structure for that. So I propose, and we haven't gone into this at all, but my preference is to use the term region for that latter thing, and to use what we started with namespace for this term here. I just wanted to. Yeah, no, good point. And
just to point, Rick Taylor, just to point out, John and I have really only have this presentation. We haven't got a draft to back this up because we weren't sure whether prior art existed on this and whether people had really looked, not prior art, but whether previous work had gone into this and discounted it already. It was really a case of testing the waters to see whether we're about to go down a rabbit hole that we've already looked down.
Please finish.
Okay. All right. So yes, eventually the bundle gets to the resolver. The resolver removes or potentially adds to the ERB. And then eventually when it gets to some kind of border gateway with Alice, then the border gateway will obviously swap the ERBs that are presented in the old namespace and put ERBs on that are in the new namespace, if that needs to happen. And then there's a return path to help it get back the other way. And potentially there's a potential option for some kind of crumb trail to help it get back. So here's the diagram of what we've just been talking about. So it's going from Alice to the resolver, from the source node to the resolver inside Alice, from resolver to the border gateway, somehow through the border gateway, and then to the other end in Bobland. So this has kind of evolved out of the work that we've been looking at on static routing, which we picked up, goodness knows how long ago now. So therefore we believe it is within the scope of the current charter. So the question to the room is, do you like this? Do you think we should write a draft on it?
And yes, it is very similar to Lisp and MPLS. It's label switching, but it's semantic label. It has parallels. I
would disagree with
okay.
Marc Lachet, I guess I understand what you're trying to do. It's kind of, to me, it's in 3 words, is tunneling to another namespace. But in reality, do we really need this? That's what has been struggling in my head, which is, are people really going to gateways between different namespace in this? I'm not sure. So, but that's kind of question mark. Do we really need this?
Jörg, I have another question. So if you had these wonderful 2 separate clouds there, which seem to presume that namespaces are neatly isolated, similar to topologies, autonomous systems, or something like that. And if you think it this way, then the resolver may make some sense, provided that we need it, which may be a different question that I don't want to discuss right now. I would foresee that you might have, in a grand deployment scenario, many routers that support several namespaces at the same time on the same devices, on whatever you have. And so the interesting question is whether this would actually be workable in such an environment where you have a high degree of intertwining between different namespaces, and there is no clear-cut gateway that you could route to, because every single thing you can come across may or may not have something else, and you might end up in lots of indirections. So that's a separate question, whether if we would go down that road, then of thinking more about the namespaces, then one should consider these scenarios. Or wouldn't everybody just have a default route anyway for whatever you can't match in your routing table? Because at the end of the day, if somebody gives you a route, this is a DTN colon plus an opaque string on which you do octet-wise comparison. So only if none of these matches, as you said earlier, it needs to go somewhere else. But then you would need a default route, and okay, then.
But that's sort of the point, is your default route that you've just described. Sorry, Rick Taylor. Your default route that you've just described is a resolver. It's not necessarily the default router. You're just giving it to someone, because remember, we're late binding here. So it's giving it to someone who has some idea of how to route it, rather than somebody who is expected to be on the path to the correct destination.
Actually, saying binding, I think that's a good way of thinking about it, is that it's the resolver is something that knows how to do the binding, or knows somebody who knows how to do the binding, and the source is somebody who does not know how to do that binding, and that's it's the ability to do the late binding that is at issue. And I wanted to pick up on one thing that Mark said, is that about tunneling. And we discussed tunneling as a way to do this, and that is in a minimalist sort of way. I think we could do all this with bundle encapsulation or some other tunneling mechanism. I am persuaded that doing it with adding and removing, so pushing and popping extension blocks is a lower impact way of doing it, instead of doing a whole encapsulation thing. I think that's a discussion to have, but that's, I mean, going to the point of do you need it or not? In a sense, you sort of don't need it, because we could do it another way. I think this is an optimization that is a potentially very valuable optimization.
Can I just, it's Rick Taylor again, coming back to, or sort of extending Scott's point about the tunneling. There's a sort of implicit understanding when you tunnel something that the wrapped packet or bundle in this case is now opaque, and you should look at the external header, because that's now, you know, the tunnel header is what you should be using for your forwarding. The reason we were keen on having it as an extension block was there's nothing to stop intermediate nodes on the route to the resolver, or on the route to wherever this bundle is found, looking at the primary block and saying, hey, I know where to send this, because I may have received information after the transmission that the resolver may even have disappeared. So I can just strip these blocks out and replace them with entirely different ones. So the original primary bundle block is valid and examinable by everyone on the way through as well. So we're not trying to say, forget all this primary bundle and look at this new one we've put on. It's a case of here are some hints to be used by everyone along the path. Perhaps that, you know, this is a question piece. That's why there isn't a draft to back it up, but we're very happy to start trying to write this down.
Yeah, I think this is also aimed at nodes that are potentially resource constrained, or times when you don't want to roll out your entire addressing plan everywhere. So you have the ability to just concentrate your intelligence in some few number of nodes that are called resolvers, I guess.
This is Ed. Just a question about the resolvers themselves. Is the concept that a resolver would understand all namespaces and that you could go to any resolver, or is there an idea that some resolvers may only know a subset of the namespaces, and then you would have to understand which resolver to eventually get to?
If you want to. I think the second case, but do carry on.
Yeah, I always envisaged where you may find, say we've got a network of constrained nodes that are shoveling packets around, and a bundle is placed into that by some source node in there generates a bundle addressed externally in a scheme that it doesn't understand. I would imagine those constrained nodes being pre-configured out of band to say, you get an address you don't understand, you send it to that node over there. That node over there may have just enough intelligence in it to say, if it looks like this, send it to that resolver. If it looks like that, send it to that resolver. But that can be out of band configured for within that local network, the local organization topology distribution, however you're laying them out. I wouldn't be an expectation that everyone can resolve everything.
Okay. And then the follow-up to that is, does that then put us to like a BGP for resolvers?
We had some slides on that, and we decided to not include them because that was built on the assumption that the first set of slides was a good idea. But given you've got a TCP CL, then you've got TCP. And given that there's a global DNS system, then if your final many hop default resolver happens to be connected to the internet, then why can't you do a service lookup in DNS to resolve a scheme against perhaps a DNS name, and then just you've got your TCP connection and you're away? But that's a whole further topic, but we didn't want to get into.
No, understood. It's just that would be the maintenance and upkeep of the resolvers and the injection of new namespaces and all of that. Yes.
Well, that was a case of, well, let's look at DNS for that and not try and invent our own.
Yeah, that kind of comes down to routing protocols that we've kind of stood back from at the moment. But essentially, yes.
Thank you.
Have you got more slides, John? I think there's 2 or 3 more.
Another one?
Yeah. Okay. That's the backup one.
That's the backup, yes. Should we talk about this? Yeah, might as well. So this is the backup slide to the one that I slid in a couple of slides back, where you have some idea of being able to portray an address scheme and a scheme-specific part. So there's the address scheme and there's the scheme-specific part. So if you're within, so if there are existing implementations out there, which I believe there are for ION DTN2, they start DTN// but you could use / for to indicate the current local scheme. So the first / indicates it's local, whatever local means, within your kind of address space that you just got the thing from. We know that IPN has a reserved scheme-specific part on the front, but that could be potentially mapped as well. But it's only needed when sending from IPN to some kind of generic DTN. It was kind of a desire to not have all of the scheme names being registered with IANA, because IANA are probably going to go, well, why did you want to register 25 different scheme names? Why don't you just have one and then have some hierarchy underneath for whatever you want? Any comments on that at all?
Can I clarify that last statement? It was trying to avoid registering 101 DTN schemes at the same level as HTTP. That's what we were trying to avoid. Okay, we've got DTN and we've got IPN, I believe, but I think that's probably as many as we're going to get. So if we want to have subschemes so that people can address as suits their deployments, then we can register them underneath in some other way. This is work in progress and a bit hand wavy.
Jörg, just one comment on the possibility to leave out DTN colon altogether. I would probably not try to avoid this, since there are some schemes like the named information, the NI scheme, that for certain deployments might be quite useful. So you want to be able to differentiate between those. And I think it says somewhere, do we need this in the bundle header at the last, and then otherwise the scheme might not be obvious.
Yeah.
You might.
Yeah.
Therefore, I would probably have to have it.
Okay.
Hi, Mark Moscow from Park. Just relating this, when I see this, I think URIs and the / in the URI is for an authority, not an absolute path.
Yeah.
So, I mean, was there a reason to use //? And
Yeah, because the two major open source implementations at the moment, which are Ion and DTN, I'm looking at Scott to confirm this for me, I believe oh, right, it's a URI, we'll put the slashes in there. So,
well, then
although
maybe
DTN stops with the colon, but you'll find the implementations currently are using the double slashes. So it came down to, well, if we want to do something which doesn't involve those slashes, can we just reuse those two slashes to mean locally? It's again, this is all up for questions, but
okay,
I totally agree with
probably
you.
confusing than calling it a URI.
Yeah, those slashes are so not meant to be there.
Scott Burley again. And now that I think of it, in the BP BIS, I believe we are now saying that the encoding of endpoint IDs is there's a scheme ID, and then the SSP
Scheme specific part.
right, and the encoding of the SSP can be numeric or it can be whatever, depending on what the scheme is. That scheme ID, we're going to need to work out something here, because we actually have sort of two levels of scheme, and that may be fine, because it may be that we can just say that there's some scheme number that is IPN colon, and then there's a bunch of other scheme numbers that are DTN colon A and DTN colon B and so on. They're just, it's probably not a problem. I just thought it is an angle that I had not realized until just now.
Okay.
I think it's doable though.
So can I ask a personal question? This isn't me with the chair hats on. If John and I went away and wrote a draft trying to formalize some of these ideas, would people be interested in reading it? I'm not asking for working group adoption. I'm just trying to avoid wasting time.
Yeah,
That's the question. Would it be an interesting exercise? I'm happy to do the exercise as long as it's interesting for other people.
Drafts are free.
Scott Burley again. I think at the very least, what would come out of that is a definition of the DTN scheme, which I've thought for a long time, we really need something. And if it did nothing more than bring us closer to some sort of definition of what that scheme is, I think that'd be worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, John Dodell, I think if we're going to have different address schemes, then we have to have a means of moving data between them. I would think the ISG would look at, how are you going to move your data around, even between a scheme and the internet, I guess, or the normal internet, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different than.
So that's us, isn't it? Unless anyone wants to raise anything else, I think we can wrap up early. Everyone done the blue sheets?
Blue sheets. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Mark, can I have a chat with you and Spencer and Ed as soon as possible, because Ed's raised an issue he's got with CCSDS, who've cut and pasted a load of his drafts.
Sorry?
Let me grab Ed. Three, I'm very sorry. 3 major implementations. Ronald has corrected me.